And I'm going to talk about an aspect of books that if you're not good at it, you're never going to get to read by yourself. And that's words. Words matter a lot in reading. And what's exciting is that we know a lot more about words in 2015 than we did even 3 or 4 years ago. And I want to share some of that with you today. So this is a really crude diagram of the amount of information that's on the World Wide Web over a space of a very, very short time. So if you look at the little dot, that's 1986. And I'm sure that I've got this inaccurate, but we did the best we could in trying to represent how much information there is. So the digital global age has made essential, right, our ability to access knowledge. But one of the things that's really amazing about this digital global age is that at the same time that literacy requirements have increased, we've also learned a lot more about how words function in text. So you have to realize that with millions and millions of words in texts, we can actually analyze what makes vocabulary distinctive in different kinds of texts. So it's not just talking about informational text as a genre, it's talking about how the words in informational texts are different than those in narrative texts. What I'm going to talk about today are 5 of the things that we've learned as a result of these giant databases. So one of the things, the thing I always say about this is, you know, in the United States, we actually invented the assembly line for cars, but we don't make a lot of our own cars anymore. And we invented blue jeans as part of the gold rush here in California, but in the main, we don't make our own blue jeans. But what we do in the United States is we make knowledge accessible. So if you think of all the big companies, right? Apple, Google, American companies are making knowledge accessible. But what I'm going to suggest is that within a 50-mile radius of Google and Apple, we've got lots of kids in schools who are never going to be able to access the largesse of the informational age. And what I'm going to tell you today can make an enormous difference. I'm going to give you 5 facts about words. I'm going to give you 5 discrete actions. And I think this is apocryphal and very, very gutsy of me, but I'm going to give you 5 open access resources so that you don't have to wait to get materials, or if you can't afford them, you can do this coming week. You can share this with your teachers. So everything we do at TextProject is open access, and I'm going to share open access materials with you. So the thing that makes complex text distinctive is the vocabulary in it. So what you're seeing is a narrative text and an informational text, and the words in purple are the words that fall outside those 2,500 complex word families that Patrick referred to that I've worked on. Okay? Every single complex text is going to have another group of purple words. And the deal is we can't teach all the purple words. But we can teach you how to learn purple words. And that's what I want to talk about. Okay, so 5 word facts and then 5-word actions, and each of those actions is going to have an open access material. Okay, so the first word fact, and this is a really important concept to understand. Knowledge is stored in text. And some of you might say, yeah, we have a lot of knowledge in DVDs and CDs. We can stream knowledge, you don't need a text for that. But the point is that historically, and even right now, to get a CD or a DVD, we actually started with a script. So as human beings, and this is a really important thing to realize, that what distinguishes us as a species from other groups is that we can store what we know, what we've found out from one generation to another, and we do that in books. We do that in text. And what we as Americans have made possible is that we have made accessible the knowledge of peoplekind. What we know is that we're the only species that actually can take words and write them down. So this fact that we have written words, and the point is that our texts, even Goodnight Moon, is typically more complex than the conversations between college students or college graduates. Okay, so texts, even Goodnight Moon, are more complex than conversations. And English has far more words in it than we can ever teach. Except for a very few languages, like Mandarin. Yes, more than Spanish, more than French, and more than German, English has more words. Now, if we were to have a conversation about that, we can come up with lots of different reasons, but the real reason is our history of where English came from. Now, if you are looking for something which you want all of the teachers in your district or school to have a shared tattoo, this is the item that you want. Okay, this is, and by the way, 3rd graders and up should know this little pyramid that I've shown you here. I should be able to walk in your classrooms and kids should be able to tell us this. Because the reason English has so many words is that it started, remember, Americans didn't invent it, right? Just wanted to be clear about that. There's actually, people called the Anglo-Saxons who started this language, and they were actually Germans, and they spoke a Germanic kind of dialect. And that dialect has continued for centuries, and it's actually what we teach beginning phonics around. Okay, little words like bet, fet, met, a word like cold, old, told, those are Germanic words. And I'm fascinated that in this state, we spend a lot of time trying to teach our Spanish speakers German. Because that's where we spend a lot of our time, not on the second layer of English. So if you look at the middle part there, okay, the Normans came to England. They brought French with them, and the people who talked French were the upper classes. The people who ran the ships and the farms and chopped wood, they continued to speak Anglo-Saxon. But the people in the courts, the ecclesiastical system, they spoke French. And what happened is for almost every German word, and with a name like Elfriede Hildegard, I do have some authority to speak about German. Das ist richtig. But if you think of a word like cult or Kirche in German, church code book, there's a French equivalent. Okay, when the French left England, they didn't leave their syntax, but they left the words. And it actually turns out that if you're a Spanish speaker or a Portuguese speaker or a Romanian speaker or a French speaker, Italian, you've got a leg up on academic vocabulary. And if you don't know that, you need to learn it. Okay, so for a word like cold, we have another word like frigid. That's why we have so many words. And this, by the way, you know, your teachers have to just be automatic with this. We often haven't shared this with our folks in teacher education. Why? Because we want to see if people can discover this themselves. That's sarcastic, by the way. Okay. And at the very tip of the pyramid, we've got specialized words, you know, like chemotherapy. Okay, words, Greek acts a different way. And do you all know that each one of these levels creates new words in different ways? So in the French level, you don't create new French kind of words. You know, we had a president who would create words like strategery. You don't do that. Okay? The way we create new words, like when we get the internet, we create new words by using the compounding system of German. I spent probably a little bit too much time on this, but you and your teachers and your kids, this is information just like mathematical algorithms. My goal in my lifetime, and I've just gotten started, is that we have sessions like mathematics where kids learn about these linguistic systems, that we don't just leave it to when they see things in books. I have to hurry here because my brother-in-law, he's already left, okay? My brother-in-law, who's a doctor, actually came to hear me, and he is very interested in medical literacy. It turns out, you know, if people can't read prescriptions or directions, it actually causes a fair amount of problem. But, and he wanted to actually hear me, but everything I've said here, I have also on a YouTube. Not as funny as that little kid, you know, who goes, Linda, Linda, listen to me, listen. But it's good, nonetheless. Okay, so the other fact to know about words is that a very small group of English words does the heavy lifting. Now, we've known this for a really, really long time. In fact, somebody named Thorndike figured this out about 100 years ago, and he came up with a list, and one of his students, who was kind of a slacker, all he ever did was take his mentor's words, and he came up with a list called the Dolch words. Okay? And then some other student, William S. Gray, tried to make some books with the most frequent words, because the thinking is, if a really small number of words accounts for most of the text, why don't we use that really small number of words to write stories? And they were called Dick and Jane. And you remember Dick and Jane had some real issues about being obsessive compulsive. They had to do everything 3 times. So if some of you are children or grandchildren of baby boomers, this explains a lot. But the point is that it didn't make sense to write stories with just those most frequent words, because a lot of those words are high-function words. Okay? But it's critical for us to know that if you're not highly fluent, and the thing that we know about American kids is that all but about 2% can decode most of the words in text by 3rd grade. They're just very slow at it because they don't read enough. And often that's because they don't read enough that gets them highly fluent with this core vocabulary. Okay, I just wanted to tell you that I actually took every single one of those exemplars from the Common Core to see how my 2,500 complex word families did. And this gives you a sense that in any complex text, those 2,500 words happen. Now, the thing is that they get shared by both informational and narrative text, but it's the 10% that are different in stories and in informational text, okay? And the difference, this is a really important thing, because often we've taught vocabulary. You know, we cherry pick 8 words from a book and teach those. Think about it. If the book is about 2,000 words long, and there are about 8 hard words per 100, you missed about 152 hard words. So I'm saying we have to help kids develop strategies for those other words too, or make sure that the words that we're using to teach are the really critical words. Okay, so my point is that words in the other 10%, the purple words, hang out in networks of words, idea networks. In stories, the words that are purple, in this selection from Birch Bark House, just because the word preoccupied is in that text, you wouldn't anticipate that the word gash would be in the text, right? Authors of stories use thesauruses, even if they don't do that directly. See, unlike the Dick and Jane people who always did the same thing 3 times, a good writer of a story, like Chris von Allsburg or Christopher Paul Curtis, they don't repeat the same verb over and over again in a story. Okay? They use different words to help you understand the character's motivation. In informational text, if the word embryo is in a text, it's very highly likely you might see a word like fertilized, or infant, or miniature. Okay, the words in informational text have to do with topics, and the words in narrative text have to do with synonyms. Not synonyms like they mean exactly the same thing, but synonyms that mean a related thing. Okay? So on the left-hand side are some words that were used in a set of stories. And on the right-hand side are words that could have been used that fit into the same families. This is a really critical idea because, see, we could spend forever doing a tier approach where we talked about being baffled. And it turns out the word baffled can be expected to appear about once every 3 or 4 million words of text. Chances are you're not going to see baffled again for a long time. But you may see words like perplexed. And the thing about the ideas and stories is that kids have the underlying concepts of story words. They just don't know that particular word. So we have to develop a stance of what those words mean, why they're there. Now, in informational text, I know this is a hard one to see, but in informational text, abrasive and property don't mean the same thing. Okay, now, the 4th fact about words is that words happen in families. They happen in topic networks, and words are always in families. Here's a little finding. By the time you get to 3rd grade, almost every word you see has 5 more words that belong to that family. So if we don't teach bafflement, okay, at the same time we teach a word, we've really lost an opportunity. And the 5th point, this is really critical for English language learners and kids who depend on schools to become literate. You know, kids who come from homes where they're loved, but where there's not a lot of academic rigor. Concrete words, all of us, including you, learn concrete words much more quickly than you learn an abstract word. Okay? So let's move to the actions. Any questions about, so there are those 5 word facts, right? A lot of words. Small group does the heavy lifting. Idea networks, families, concreteness. Those are the 5. Here are the actions. It's not teaching word lists. The basic point that we've got here is if kids approach life and assessments, by the way, you know, you could do some of this before these assessments come about, and it could make a huge difference. Letting kids know some things about words. It's not about word lists. I actually did the math, and if we try to teach kids every individual word in English, it would take about 100 years of 5 days at school. Not going to happen. But the first thing I want to do, in terms of teaching students to anticipate that complex text. So I actually worked on this group called Smarter Balanced. And what I noticed about the text is every single topic in ELA, in English Language Arts, has a different set of words. So if I've been led to believe as a kid that my teachers taught me most of the words, I'm in trouble. So what I've done is developed a lesson plan for you. And by the way, the front part of the handout that has all the resources, I'm going to make sure it gets onto the Scholastic site as well. But on the TextProject site, those items are all hot, so you can press it and actually get to the resource. Okay? So I've actually developed a little set of lessons called Talking Points for Teachers. And in this talking point, and I'm saying we have to have this conversation consistently. I need to keep saying to kids, listen guys, there are going to be lots and lots of complex words in text. Some of them are going to be topically related, and some of them are going to be synonym related. So this lesson plan actually gives you some ideas for how to talk to kids about anticipating complex words. Okay, so my first action is we have to talk to kids about the fact that complex texts have words that they probably haven't seen before. That doesn't mean you can't figure them out. It just means that the harder the text, the more of these hard words there are going to be. But remember, they're always going to be about 90% of those yellow words that you know. So you've always got a leg up. One of the things we notice with struggling readers is their stamina or tolerance for staying the course is really low. My message is this: our kids can read. They don't read enough to get very good at it. And when confronted with more than about 200 words, most of them drop out. And we actually have data on that. We have done work where we've had the first 200 words, we've seen how they do. And it turns out the poorest readers actually do pretty good on those first 200. But by the second 200, they're engaging in something called rapid reading. They're reading so fast, we're measuring them on the computer, right? Even President Kennedy didn't read that fast. Okay? So I'm saying what you have to do is start, you know, this is work. You know, it's a skill. And probably the hardest thing to learn to have, and I think the hardest thing to teach right now is stamina, staying the course. Okay, so I've given you an example of a conversation, probably a little hard to see on your handout, but I've given you the place where you can find it. Word action 2 is that we've got to increase immensely the amount that our kids are reading on their own. A lot of the reading that's been happening in classrooms, and I'm a great fan of read-alouds. Keep remembering, when I was very, very young, I did something called Becoming a Nation of Readers. And in that, we talked about the importance of read-alouds. That document was important in bringing authentic text onto state adoptions. But what I'm saying now is sometimes we've maybe gone into the opposite direction. And in lots of classrooms, teachers are doing a lot of the reading. And while I haven't published this study, if teachers do the reading, they get better at reading. At least I hypothesize that. Now, it's an expensive study to do, and keep remembering, I mean, I run a not-for-profit that my husband funds. One of the experiments that I've been doing is I've been outsourcing, there's a really strange sound, but I've been outsourcing my Pilates practice. I've actually been having somebody else do it. And sometimes I watch. And it makes me feel very good about what I've done for that person. But you know, when you see me, and remember, I'm going to be around for a long time, so when you see me in another 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, good chance I'm going to be using a walker. And what I'm suggesting is don't be having your kids use a walker forever. Kids have got to read. And to support that, here's what I've done. I've developed about 100 little magazine articles that are for free download. And these magazine articles are designed to give you experience with the 2,500 most frequent words. And they're on a lot of interesting background knowledge topics. Vocabulary is an aspect of background knowledge. In vocabulary and background knowledge, almost perfectly predict comprehension. We've got to be developing our kids' background knowledge. My prescription, and I am a doctor, is one magazine article at least a day for every American 3rd to 9th grader. One magazine article a day. And here's a shocking fact. When people at Park, Smarter Balanced, or at NGS, if your state decided they were going to go it on themselves and went with one of the test publishers, all of the test publishers for assessments use magazine articles. I mean, the thing that I always recommend is if you want your kids to do really well on assessments, I recommend to parents that you ensure that your kids have very bad teeth. Why is that? Because then you have to take them to the orthodontist, and that's where they'll read highlights. It's the only time they'll read highlights. And highlights is where most of the passages come from. No, not only. So what I've done here is I've provided a set of magazine articles that increasingly up the ante for the purple words. So on level 1, you've got a handful of pretty easy purple words. Then level 3, a little harder, and level 5, even harder. These are topics that are going to be of interest to kids. They're going to help them develop background knowledge. Because here's how we're different in English language arts than in mathematics. The mathematics educators can tell you exactly what algorithms are going to be assessed at what grade levels. But you know, I just said that background knowledge is the best predictor. It turns out I can't tell you what topics might be on an assessment. Now, we're not just doing this for assessments. We're doing this for world knowledge. But I'm giving that as an example. Now, if you want some other free texts, there are about 1,500 of them at an organization called readworks.org. If you're not part of that, I highly recommend you become part of that. Now, I also want to put a plug in here for Scholastic, right? Because I'm standing here, and they have materials too. But I'm just telling you, if you want stuff to start, when you go back on, you can work on this afternoon, and then Tuesday, and then on the plane going home. I'm suggesting, honestly, on their own reading, that's different than, somebody guiding you through everything. I'm saying on your own reading, at least one article a day. And if you notice this, I organized these so that it would be enough words that kids would actually start developing some stamina. Stamina is really critical. Okay, action 3, you need to teach words in synonyms. And I guess I might be a little geeky, but I spend a lot of time, like going through databases, and what I've done is I've identified 20 highly prolific synonym networks, highly prolific. If you know these, see, it turns out that the synonyms in stories don't just happen serendipitously. They happen according to communication ideas, emotions, movements, and traits. Those are the kinds of words authors have to tell the story. Okay? So if an author tells you that, a character is eavesdropping rather than listening, or scheming rather than planning, that's really important information. Okay? So I'm saying what we want to do is teach kids. I'm saying this isn't story-specific instruction. You don't just teach an algorithm when you have a math story problem. You teach the algorithms and then apply it to math. And I'm suggesting we need to teach some things about words. And one of them are these networks of words. And to help you do that, for each of those 20 words, I have a little lesson plan. I'm not showing you the whole lesson plan, but I'm showing you the words that have to do with the word guess. And one of the things that's really important here is we're showing you what the academic words are. And we're also showing our Spanish speakers that they really know a lot when it comes to academic text. Secret we never told them. Okay? So in this case, we have words like theorize. Okay? And often, the academic word is the one used commonly in Spanish for everyday talk. Not that example, but in many cases. There also, as part of this set, there are these worksheets that you could, a record sheet for kids to print out. And I'm not suggesting that, with third graders, you're going to do all the words. I talked to a lot of teachers, and they wanted something like this, so this is just to help with kids from grades 3 to 9. Okay, now, the other thing is we want to teach topical networks and informational text. And to help you do that, what I've done is I've taken topics. I have a vault at TextProject of about 600 pictures of critical topics. And what I've done is created these maps. So, I'm a teacher. I really want to make a difference, guys. That's why I've been doing this. I think this can make an enormous difference for your kids. Here are networks of ideas having to do, for example, with machinery. Okay? And we actually have a bundle of the semantic maps to help with the words. And then we also have the pictures, and I'm going to show you those in just a minute. But do you see that? We actually help you see how the words fit together. I hope you can go home, and if you remember one thing about me, other than the trophy thing, I hope you can remember, and I also thought that you had to wear a red dress if you talked for Scholastic. So, I don't know, that was Jessica told me that that was what I had to do, so I believed it. I'm very literal. But I want you to go home with this. Words aren't islands. You never teach a word by itself. Ever. Words live in communities. Topical or synonym networks, and they have morphological families. In reading education, we've spent many careers have been made on fighting about phonics, but no one has ever had learning about morphemes, the great debate. It turns out that morphemes are very critical to teach. You know, the meaning units of words. 3 kinds. There are endings like ed, ing, s. Compound words are huge in English, and they're very hard to teach. Why? Because you can't teach them as families very well. You know, think about a compound word family like playground, playgirl. It has to do with playfulness, but very different kinds of concepts. Okay, so as part of these semantic networks that I've provided, we also provide support for morphological families. Okay, so for every one of those words, we also provide you with the morphological connections and a form for kids to fill out. And finally, as I said, when appropriate, introduce new concepts with pictures. Now, in my work with colleagues in Silicon Valley, there's the thinking that the internet can do anything. So you should be able to have an algorithm, just type in a word, and then you should be able to, as a teacher, get all the pictures for that word. Well, it turns out somebody somewhere is programming every single word in English to be accompanied by something very pornographic. So it turns out that that typically doesn't work. So one of the things that I've been doing is vetting pictures. You know, you never know what kids will get when they just type in a word and get all the pictures for it. So for my machine words, here are some examples of the words of the pictures that we provide. These are in packets. Pretty soon we'll have them as individual words. Do you also notice that I've done the word as syllables? Because we provide so many multisyllabic words so quickly in our current reading instruction, that's one of the biggest problems our kids have. And I'm not saying let's teach them syllables, you know, like, oh, this is the CVVC pattern, whatever. I don't even know those patterns. But we need to show them when they're being introduced to new words what some of these patterns are. This is pretty cool, right? And this is what I think is the coolest, and I've only started on this. And I think in the spring now we're going to actually invite American teachers to add to this. Because we're not-for-profit, we can get pictures that otherwise people can't get, but we have to vet the pictures very, very carefully. And I'm going to suggest that for certain pieces of children's literature, the background knowledge required to make sense of the story is immense, and that pictures can really help. Historical texts, such as The Secret Garden or Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, have a lot of requirements that kids in 1895, when Frances Burnett wrote this book, knew about. Kids in 2015 don't. And here's some examples of the kinds of things they don't know about, like a carriage in a train. Okay, so these are some examples of things. So we've been collecting sets of pictures for children's stories. And in the spring, we're going to invite American teachers to start contributing to those. Okay? I'm saying that can be very, very critical. Sometimes we know the stuff. You know, I've spent a lot of time in Northern England, so I know what a moor is, and you might not think about it. I keep thinking of when I taught in Central California, and you could actually see the Sierras on a good day if there wasn't a lot of fog in Fresno, and there was a lot of snow in the Sierras. And I expected that my farm worker kids knew about snow. I mean, I was born in Winnipeg. You know, snow is us. It turned out one of the stories was really around the notion of snow. And these kids had never seen snow. They didn't know what it's like when the first snow comes and it's very quiet outside. But I had made the assumption that they all knew about that, because I did. Okay, now here are my 5 word facts in my open access resources. The presentation is at TextProject. This sheet is at TextProject. All of the open access resources are hot. You can press them, and you can get to them. So I should actually try to turn this off and see if you can remember. So word fact 1 was lots of words. 2, heavy lifting, small group. 3, networks, idea networks, right? Informational text, topics. Narrative text, synonyms. 4, morphological families. And 5, concrete words. By the way, now that I've done this in-service with you, you're welcome to do like little, like Tupperware parties where you invite your friends in and have similar kinds of, you can deputize other people about this. These are really 5 incredibly critical ideas. I want to invite you to join our TextProject newsletter. We send out 1 newsletter, that's all we ever contact you. But here's what I've been doing. For years, I've been writing these books as a work of love. And when you join our newsletter, every month you get one of these stories of words books. They're about etymology. Etymology is way cool, helping kids understand where words come from. It also brings in a lot of the multiculturalism of American English, like where we get words for food. Do you know that half of the names of our states come from native indigenous languages? Pretty cool, huh? It might be 24, I have to check that, but around there. And finally, I want to invite you to, this was actually my Christmas present, a revamped website, and we've got everything that I've said here. We've got articles for teachers. We've got YouTube videos. They're not as funny as Mateo, and the Linda, listen, honey, but pretty funny sometimes. So there are materials for you to do in service. There are classroom materials. We've got a whole beginning reading program. On our Pinterest site, I curate free texts that are available on the internet. If you type in free text for kids, you can get some pretty weird stuff, and often they aren't really free. So I've actually gone and curated that for you. And if you have some questions or comments, I'd like to hear them. I know that this was a real shift from Patrick's discussion with you. And I've gone through a lot of material, but I'm very hopeful that I can leave you with the sense that we're learning so much about how texts work. The demands for kids and using texts are increasing, but so is our knowledge. And that knowledge can go an enormous way to helping kids get the access they want and need to participate in the 21st century. I thank you so much, Scholastic, for the opportunity. And I also thank all of you for who you are and what you do every day. Thank you.